Thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it. Obviously, carjacking is something that a lot of people are concerned about right now as cases are up in DC and Prince George's County. The latest numbers showed about 30% up in DC compared to last year. So what is the task force doing to try and address this?
So we currently have 12 detectives assigned to us, and we have a very strong partnership with the Federal Bureau of Investigations, the FBI, and we've also strengthened our partnerships with surrounding agencies, i.e. Prince George's County, Montgomery County, Northern Virginia agencies, where we're seeing a lot of overlap with our carjacking offenses. We're seeing the same suspects or similar suspects, similar MO, being shared amongst offenses, just not in the district, but also in surrounding jurisdictions. So working with these outside agencies, increasing the communication, just improving where we can our working relationship with the Office of the Attorney General here in the city, as well as the United States Attorney's Office.
I think a lot of people are just looking at headlines, and so it seems really scary when it's just coming at them. But what is the scope? Like, how big of an increase are we seeing year to year and over the last decade?
Over the last decade, I don't readily have those numbers. That's something we can definitely dig up. I would definitely say there has been a substantial increase. I would say even since calendar year 2020, there's been a significant increase. And like you just stated, we've seen at least like about roughly 27 to 30% increase in the carjackings. And that's going to include both armed and unarmed carjackings just here in this city.
Where are the hotspots for this types of carjacking in DC? Where are we seeing it mostly?
So I think it's safe to say at one point early on when we started to see the uptick, it was concentrated in one specific area. But since the offense itself has increased so significantly, there's not one hotspot. There's not one ward, if you will, in the city or one district as in regards to Metropolitan Police Department's terms. It's a citywide issue, and we're tackling it as best as we can within the legal scope of our responsibilities.
Yeah, I think Ward 6 had the most, or District 6, I should say, had the most. They had 770 at the time, a couple days ago, so maybe it's even more. But that district didn't have a big increase. The biggest increases were like in sort of downtown area, where like I know one district had like a 145% increase year to year. So are you seeing a trend line where, is that what you're talking about? It used to be sort of on the east side of the river and it's now moving more downtown?
Well, I think this is something that will parallel into a later conversation that we'll be having, I'm sure. Typically our carjacking victims are victimized when they're most vulnerable, when they're not paying attention or their focus is redirected elsewhere, they're on the phone. And what we're seeing with the increases you just mentioned, those are going to be like our nightlife areas, when people are, focused and engaged in conversation with other individuals and just having a good time and enjoying the night, or they're, just out and they're focused on having a good time and enjoying themselves in the city. And then they become the unfortunate victim of a violent crime. And that might be where we're seeing the increase there is in some of our nightlife areas.
Is a certain type of car being targeted, or is it just whatever car they could get?
I stick to my guns when I say across the broad spectrum. I think it's just whatever car they're going for that time, whatever they can essentially get their hands on, and what they deem to be most available at that time. Who's not paying attention or who's sitting in their car scrolling on their phone. I can't necessarily pinpoint that there's one specific vehicle that they're targeting. That would be unfair to say, and we don't have the data to even support that. But I know a lot of the media will focus on, oh, well, we had a Mercedes taken, we had this kind of car taken, or you're hiring vehicles. But again, we'll also have a Toyota taken, or a Ford, and it doesn't matter. They're just whatever is available to them, I guess, for a horrible lack of better terms. It's just whatever is available to them and what they come across.
So just because I don't have a BMW or Mercedes, my Jetta's not safe, is what you're saying.
Jettas are not safe either.
I appreciate you answering that. Is there a time of day? I know you mentioned nightlife. Is it like, are you seeing mostly that these carjackings are happening at night? what are you seeing as far as when these carjackings are happening?
Full disclosure, we see them all throughout a 24-hour time frame. Obviously, the night does provide an added layer and an added benefit to the criminal element. Obviously, you do have street lights, but there will be some streets that may not be as well lit to help disguise themselves. So nighttime, we do see a little bit of an uptick, maybe a little bit more of an increase, but these certainly do not discriminate when the sun is out or inclement weather.
And then I think I want to really focus in on this part. So, like, what are that we've done a lot of stories where it's saying talking about all these high-profile cases, and it could just be really scary. What's some advice for drivers? What are some ways to avoid this happening to them?
And, I feel like it's a great question, right? But it's something that we have to really tread lightly with, because at the end of the day, I enjoy being in the District of Columbia, right? It's our nation's capital, but we just cannot instill this atmosphere of fear, like, oh, you have to be hyper cognizant of your surroundings, but it does help. And the example that I typically give is, we come home from a long day at work, we just want to unwind, we parallel park our vehicle, we're sitting on our phone, scrolling through our social media platforms, or scrolling through our emails one last time before we just disconnect for the night and going greet our loved one, significant other, who our pets, and you're just sitting in your car scrolling, and you're just, you're decompressing from the day. And then that glow from the phone when you're sitting in your vehicle is what our suspects are looking for. And with a lot of our investigations, the complainants fortunately are very forthcoming with the fact I was sitting in my car, I was on my phone. And I don't want to take that freedom away from anyone. I would certainly not tell anyone not to do it. We all have the right to make our own decisions. However, given the heightened instances of these crimes, it just might be a better idea to go inside to your residence, or somewhere safer in a restaurant, dining area, what have you, where and not just in your car where you're alone. And typically our victims will say they're sitting in the car, and then suddenly they're approached with someone out of the blue on either side or both sides of their vehicle. Never saw them coming. Another thing I would say too is, we see a lot of drivers who have their earbuds in. I know the newest version that Apple has put out with the earbuds, and not just Apple, but other brands of earbuds or headphones. They have noise cancellation, so that really takes away from what is going on around you. That also doesn't help and does not benefit our victims. They just, they can't hear their surroundings. Not even when you're in your car, but if you're approaching your car, you're taking groceries out of your car, at that point, you still have your constructive possession of the vehicle, and that would be classified as a carjacking. And, you're occupied, like maybe you have like your kids running back and forth to the car. You're occupied making sure, the plastic bags don't break. You want to make sure your eggs don't fall out. And so and essentially what it boils down to, you just want to limit your distractions as much as humanly possible.
That's really fascinating because I think a lot of people think of, the Grand Theft Auto, the game. They think of it as, guns out at a stoplight. Do you see that as well, or is it primarily just this? You're sitting in your car scrolling or distracted when it happens?
I would say not so much at the traffic lights, but I would certainly say either at a gas station. Again, you're occupied on fueling your vehicle. There's always something that's taking away from from the victim's attention, or just sitting in the car. We don't necessarily, and I'm not saying it has not happened or that it will not happen, but we typically see the victims sitting in their car. And I would also like to highlight too, the unfortunate victims who are food delivery drivers or share drivers. And, we're seeing that as well, that they're becoming victims of these carjackings. They leave their vehicles running, because it's their income is incumbent upon, how many deliveries they're making and their tips. And they will unfortunately leave their vehicles running. And that's when they also become, it's a crime of opportunity. Again, the vehicle's left running. They're just entering their vehicle. They're checking their phone for the next fare or for the next delivery. And that's something else that we've been really trying to spread throughout, like the ANC meetings and the various community meetings. Just be cognizant, have the district commanders and the captains and, just the department as a whole, when they're interacting with the citizens. Hey, these are steps that you can take so that you don't become a victim of a carjacking, or, steps that you can take to be, to decrease your chances of becoming a victim of a carjacking.
Any way to quantify how often the victims are car sharing? These Uber and Lyft drivers, or is it just there have been some anecdotes?
Just some anecdotes. It's just, sometimes we see a little bit more of an increase. They pop up every now and then, and the offenses with the share drivers or the food delivery drivers. But we, because of their employment, we typically have a decent closure rate with that because of the tracking and the working relationship that we do have with Uber, with Lyft. They've been exceptional in assisting us in a law enforcement and legal capacity in our investigations.
One thing that I thought was really interesting when I was doing all this, when I was doing the research, it's that not just like here and there it's kids, but like 2/3 of the arrests for carjacking in the last year have been minors, and some of them are 13 years old, 14 years old. What could be done to try and stop that? What are you guys doing to try and intervene and stop teenagers from stealing cars?
So that's a really valid point. And I think at the end of the day, it's also an incredibly sad point. So as far as our unit, the Carjacking Task Force is concerned, we diligently work with the Office of the Attorney General to try to highlight, especially if it's a juvenile that is a recidivist. We highly be like, look, this is the familiarity that we have with the family. This is what the needs are. This is what the parent or the guardian or the family members have highlighted, that this juvenile, this is their special needs. This is what they need assistance with, or this is where, they need some kind of program put into place. So we do diligently work with the OAG, and we're in that fashion. But if we do have interaction with the juvenile offenders family, we do highlight some of the programs that are available. We're able to give them, obviously good contact information with the Office of the Attorney General. And though they may not be very happy with the Office of the Attorney General, since that's a prosecution for those cases, but they do have a lot of resources through the juvenile offender agencies like CSS and Department of Youth Rehabilitation Services have a lot of programs in place, so that we're just not, the children aren't being funneled, or the juveniles are not being funneled into, secure detainment. There's other outlying programs where they don't have to be detained and they can still reside in the home or within the care of family and legal guardians.
Got it. And then just last question, with drivers being so scared, not all of them, but those that watch the news perhaps. What's sort of the message that you have for drivers out there who might be worried about this spike in carjackings?
I think if our citizens are very concerned, or, not, just have a remote concern, what I would implore would be, a lot, especially newer vehicles, have tracking capabilities. Just for an example, Mercedes uses Embrace. Hyundai uses Blue Link. There's a bunch of, each manufacturer has their own tracking capabilities, and that can be initiated by the owner when the vehicle is purchased or at a later time. And that does help significantly, one, with the recovery of the vehicle. And what we do encounter a lot speaking with our victims is they say, oh, well, I purchased this vehicle, and they're, we'll ask them, for example, like a Hyundai, like Tucson. Okay, well, did you initiate, the Blue Link in your vehicle? And they're like, oh no, I never did it. And then you, as a victim, you're already traumatized dealing with the violent offense itself, and you're trying to just deal in, just take in exactly what happened. And then now you're encountering all these other issues that you have to now deal with, setting up this tracking, or, dealing with your insurance company. So it's best practice if, and if there's, again, I understand too, that there are costs that come with that as well. But if it's a feasible option, we do ask that citizens have these tracking capabilities activated on their vehicles. Another thing that we're really starting to see with citizens, they will tell us the Apple tags are, they're very small, going to be placed discreetly, going to be tracked with a cell phone. But then the flip side to that is too, is a lot of our victim phones are being taken during the offenses. And so with that being said, whether it's a Droid or an Apple or an iOS software, just make sure someone that you have near and dear to your heart that you fully trust has your Apple login or, some kind of login so you can go and get and maybe track your phone, because that does help and aid greatly in our investigation. So we can narrow it down to a certain area if they don't turn off the phone. Um, but otherwise, it's just the old rule of thumb. Just be aware of what's going on around you. And again, I don't want to instill this huge, just thing of fear in everyone, but given the uptick, it just always helps to just be cognizant of what's going on around you. Don't try not to have try to limit your distractions as much as possible.
And then to state the obvious, I brought this up with somebody in my family yesterday. If somebody's pointing a gun at you and asking for your car, what's the suggested action?
Please give them your car, because your life cannot be cannot be replaced, and there's no monetary value in this world that could ever overtake the worth of yourself. Just give them the car, give them the phone, give them whatever they're asking for. Everything can be replaced except for you.
That's what I said yesterday. I said we could get a new car if that ever happened. Anything else that I didn't ask about that you think is important? Something about this trend of carjacking spikes?
I would say, COVID has really, everybody's still, a lot of people are still taking the precautions, and I fully support it with wearing masks. And one thing when we do make an arrest, that the prosecutors will often have to be like, oh, and the victim ID. And, that's very frustrating when we come back to the victim and they're like, no, I can't ID. And that makes it difficult for our investigation, but not by the victim's fault. But um, I'm just highlighting this for you, so maybe you want to use it in your story, but that makes it really difficult for the investigation, because the prosecution now is like, well, if the victim can't ID, and I'm like, they can't ID because they were looking down the barrel of a gun. I just, or they just were so overwhelmed with fear, and your tunnel vision kicks in, and your scope of vision just completely decreases, and it becomes very, very difficult for victims to be able to ID or recall what clothing was being worn. But you know it just all goes back, just be cognizant. And then too, like, if citizens have the cameras affixed to their house, like the private residential cameras, we have ways of being very discreet of making contact with them if they don't want to have direct police interaction. There's always a way that the carjacking task force, or even um, the district level detectives, can be contacted if they know that an offense occurred within their block. They never have to come out and be like, hey detective, I've got this footage. You can always call our command information center, 202-727-9099, or you can text anonymously 50411. Hey, I have this footage, I can send it to whatever address or email address. And that always helps out significantly with our investigation. So the residential cameras, but also get the underlying, a lot of people don't, not a lot, some citizens don't want to have cops, at their house, just waiting, because it draws attention to their house. So I respect that, but it does help when the cameras are activated, or, just not there for a showpiece.
All right. Well, I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
You're welcome.